Thank you. Welcome, everyone, as you're filing in. We have a lot to cover today, and then we're going to try and keep it to the full hour, and hopefully not go over. We want to be cognizant of everyone's time. We are recording the webinar today, and we will make it available for all those that registered, along with the slides that Laura presents. There will also be a white paper that we're going to be turning this into. That will probably be available in the next week or so, or a couple of weeks actually, following this. So be on the lookout for that. I'm going to be dropping some links into the chat so that you guys can stay up to speed on some insights that we've launched on our website. Keep track of all the news and thought leadership that we're posting. Put that in there now. As well as our YouTube channel, where every webinar that we've done previously, plus some of our recent 1-minute videos that are helpful for our customers and using our product and database, can take advantage of. So just want to introduce myself. My name is Phil Flora, Head of Sales and Marketing here at Leopard Solutions. I want to thank everyone for joining. We have a great panel. Look forward to hearing all their great insights, as well as this year's update on our data for the state of the legal industry. This is our 4th rendition of this. We're excited to have everyone on. We will also be on the lookout for a webinar in 2 weeks, which will be the launch of our Leopard Top 200 Index. So I'm going to drop a link to our registration for that. I believe it's on February 8th. So register for that if you haven't done so already. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get Laura to start her presentation. So Deborah, you want to take it off?
Sure. I'm thrilled to be part of this today. I'm Deborah Farone. I'm the former Chief Marketing Officer of Cravath, Swain & Moore, and prior to that, I was at Deborah. These days, I'm a consultant. I work with a number of the AmLaw 100 firms and also some of the 200 firms in marketing and strategy. And I also coach about 10 people a year.
Deborah, thank you. And I just dropped a few of the links to connect with you in our chat for those to take advantage of. Trish, want to introduce yourself?
Hi, again, I'm like Deborah, I'm happy to be here. This is some great data to dig into. I'm Trish Lilly. I am a member of the International Board of the Legal Marketing Association, and I'm the Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer at Thompson Coburn. And I've worked in legal a long time, so I really enjoy kind of seeing the trends and learning from Laura with these reports every year.
Thanks, Trish. And Danny?
Hi, everyone. I'm Danny Rossetti. I work at Buchanan, Ingersoll & Rooney. I'm based in DC. I've been with Buchanan for 15 years, and before that, in a prior life, I was a practicing attorney. In my role as Chief Talent Officer here at Buchanan, I oversee recruiting, professional development, and human resources. And very happy to be joining these great panelists and getting into this good information.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it. And thank you all for joining. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Leopard Solutions CEO and founder, Laura Leopard, to take it away.
Well, thanks, everybody. And I'm so happy we have an all-woman panel today. That's great. Yay! All right, we have a lot to go over. So I am going to go rather quickly, but slides will be available and the white paper is coming out shortly. So you all will have access to all of this data because I think it's going to be really interesting for you to have. This past year was really sort of a turbulent one. Firms were still trying to get their balance after 2021 and 2022, but last year had even more to throw at them. Firms spent their time reacting to outside pressures from multiple sources rather than being proactive with their own goals. So let's look for a moment at the events that shaped the last year. Last year, our State of the Industry report said that firms were in a state of recalibration after the wild hiring swing of prior years. We expected hiring to slow. It did. We expected firms to struggle bringing attorneys back into the office. They did. We expected firms to cut back on some staff and attorneys, and many did. It was a correction, and in some cases, an overcorrection to the wild rebound of 2021. Layoffs occurred, pay rose, mergers of firms went up, and some firms faced large defections. Firms were recalibrating, but the environment was still volatile, and their decisions, or lack of them, backfired on many firms. If you don't know our Leopard Law Firm Index, you should. We created a score-based system to look at firms in real time to judge their health and stability. We use hard data, not self-reported numbers for our ranking system, and we use multiple data points. It's dynamic. It changes in real time as firms change. In 2022, we reported that 50% of the firms in the AmLaw 200 increased in points. In 2023, we saw 60% of the AmLaw Top 200 decrease in points, and 15% decreased in status, which means they moved from good to fair or very good to good. 10% moved up in status, and 1% dropped more than one status. Now, we have a webinar on all of this, all of the reasons behind it, and also our new Leopard Law Firm Index Top 200 list of the firms in 2023, and that's coming up on February 8th. We saw a stream of top law firms cutting ranks throughout the year. Experts suggested that firms who had overhired associates on those inflated salaries during the 2021 boom are taking the logical decision to trim their ranks. It was also suggested that AI and technology were rapidly replacing the attorney workforce, and they simply didn't need more lawyers to be efficient. Some suggested that the days of heady pay could be in the rearview mirror for law firms. Then the pendulum swung the other way, particularly for firms that had sky-high profits. The ABA Journal wrote that firms with PPP at more than $2 million a year and over $1 billion per year in gross revenue, their salaries shot up after Cravath raised their salaries by $10,000 to $20,000. Now, over 50 law firms have followed suit, including some profitable boutique law firms, but there are also most who haven't. But if the competition continues to tighten throughout the year for talent, we may see more and more firms upping their base pay just to stay in the talent game. On the left, you see firms who were rumored to have laid off attorneys. It was either announced or people said they had stealth layoffs at those firms. On the right, you'll see firms who have raised their salaries. Those firms in orange appear in both lists. So they laid off and raised salaries in 2023. Schneider Harrison and Strzok & Strzok closed their doors. Schneider Harrison did not disclose the reason for the closure. Strzok & Strzok suffered from large losses of attorneys starting in the second quarter of 2023, and then a downturn in real estate gave it a severe and lasting blow. Law 360 is publishing our article on Strzok's demise, so stay tuned for that. It should be interesting reading. In May of 2023, Louis Brisbois saw a major exit of over 100 attorneys who left to go form another firm. Now, that firm is a whole nother story, but I'll just stick to this one. At the time, the reason for their exit was kind of cloudy, but some news articles said that the generation gap between the managing partner and this group of attorneys was a big part of the problem. Their managing partner announced he was stepping down shortly after their departure. And we took a look at the ages of partners in the top 200 to see if other firms were seeing issues when their managing partner was closer to 90 than 80. And indeed, we did. Our white paper, Building a Lasting Legacy, looked at the graying of partners in the top 200 and the relatively small ranks of mid-level partners. We saw that recruitment and retention were more difficult when a firm's leadership was aging in place. We even found that those firms with younger leadership had a much better ROI score for partner laterals. In a few short months, we saw more and more announced retirements of leaders. They just started appearing in the news. Kent Zimmerman of the Zinghauser Group told Bloomberg Law, "I can't remember a time when this many chairs and managing partners have told me they're going to hang it up." It really marked a sea change at many firms, and they now were seeing succession planning as an urgent business strategy to ensure the health and survival of the firm. It was a year of mergers, and we still have a giant merger looming in 2024. Small and large mergers and acquisitions of law firms were big, as some firms were seeking fast growth. Our merger report shows mergers and acquisitions of all sizes, big and small. There's also a running scorecard as we watch attrition from those combinations. You can see small firms acquired. You can see the large ones that got all the press. Small strategic acquisitions were occurring along with strategic group moves as recruitment moved to bring on larger numbers in one swoop. Now, there were about 51 law firm mergers last year. Our tool has captured 44 of them. So it's all about how many law firms we cover. And you can watch this and over time see how successful they are. It was a challenging year to be a diversity officer anywhere, a school, a corporation, or a law firm. I mean, this past year, several things happened. The Supreme Court overturned affirmative action due to a suit brought by the American Alliance. And with that victory in hand, the Alliance filed suit against Harvard, and their assault on elite universities began. The American Alliance is headed by Edward Blum, and he set his next sights on law firms, either suing or threatening to sue to make sure that firms were not considering race or disabilities when appealing for candidates. Now, as the environment around law firms heated up, we wondered why. I mean, after all, his attack on the legal profession kind of seemed ironic, as the law is one of the least diverse professions in the US. Why then? Far from being just a small grassroots organization, the American Alliance had big money backers in their quest to squash DEI. The Searle Freedom Trust was just one of the financial backers of Edward Blum's lawsuits. Now, after a few short months, Blum, in essence, has declared victory. He says he's finished suing as there's nothing left for us to do in that space. Law firms are no longer raising red flags with their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. The why became known. Battling law firms served as a warning to other industries. It got the word out to other industries that they need to step very carefully around DEI. In response, law firms are now creating new practices to help firms navigate the new landscape. It just might produce a litigation-proof model that can help diversity grow more easily in the corporate and legal sectors, but only time will tell. Defending diversity is now a new legal practice area. On Sunday morning, January 21st, the New York Times published an article backed up with over 5,000 emails from conservative groups that detailed their long quest to kill DEI initiatives wherever they were able. One such donor was the Searle Freedom Trust, who were one of the backers of the American Alliance lawsuits. Now let's see what our data has to say. Gender and ethnically diverse numbers, those who are gender and ethnically diverse, they rose another point this year, and the gains were on the associate and partner level. Women overtook men in the associate ranks for the first time after statistically tying last year. Women increased by 1% on the partner level as well. There were no gains for ethnically diverse men. Those numbers remained the same as last year. So looking at the overall universe of the top 200 with just an average really doesn't tell the whole story because every firm's different. Some have great percentages and some do not. So here for ethnically diverse attorneys, the lowest number went from 5 to 4%, and the highest number went from 39 to 38%. There was some shuffling, but the number of firms with over 30% ethnically diverse attorneys gained 2 firms. For gender, that low-end number went even lower to 19% from 21. Now, the high-end number remained the same. There was a gain of 8 firms in the 45 to 49% group, a gain of 5 firms in the 40 to 44% of women attorneys. Overall, the numbers for women improved. Who you choose to hire shows the world who you are. And we're going to take a look at the hiring patterns from 2023. Now, this was our domestic recruiting map for 2022, and there were a lot of down stats, but there were a lot of up stats too. Quite a different map for 2023. Hiring levels were down almost across the board in every quarter. Only entry levels in Q2 and Q4 and partners in Q3 and Q4 pulled ahead from the previous year, but only in very small margins. So here are the lateral hires for the top 200, and it looks as if 2023 really suffered in lateral recruitment. The numbers are below even 2018 levels. Now, firms did grow an additional 1,000 or so attorneys through mergers and acquisitions in the top 200, but even that number keeps it below the 2022 number. We did a division here. We wanted to see what the top 50 looked like as opposed to the rest of the firms in the top 200. And the firms in the AmLaw top 50 curtailed hiring far more than their counterparts. Laterals dropped for them 36% in that top 50 group, while there was just a 13% in lateral hiring in the remaining 148 firms. The cuts to entry-level hiring remained the same for both groups. Now, here we're looking at AmLaw 200 exits by practice area. So they have left their firm in the top 200, and we wanted to see how they left by practice, right? Well, we have now grouped the top 50 firms together, and then the remaining 148 right next to each other. And you can see that the corporate practice losses were much larger at the top 50 firms than the remaining 148 firms. They lost 23 and 21% of corporate attorneys, and very different numbers in the rest, between a 9 and 8% loss of those 148 firms. Now, that might suggest that the top 50 really overstaffed that practice to a much larger degree in 2021 and 2022. And they also would have paid a real premium for those attorneys at that time. Now we're looking at the places that they hired from in 2023. We call that the origin firm. The top 200 recruited just 38% from their own ranks. And in 2023, last year, that number was 42%. They recruited the same amount, 38%, from smaller firms. Now, that number was just 36% last year. So you'll see at the bottom, there are firms outside of our system that they hired from, and then there are small firms within our system that they hired from. You put them together, that's that 38%. Looking at the firms that Leopard covers, we see they recruited 8% from firms that have 50 or less attorneys. So they're either high-profile boutiques, or they're reaching even further down in those mid-sized firm ranks to pull attorneys into the top 200. Now we're looking at hiring patterns over time for ethnically diverse associates. And we see the gap for both diverse laterals and entry-level hires increased in 2023. The gap for laterals went from 34% to 39%. And the gap for entry-level hires rose 44% from 39%. The numbers went down for all groups, but the increase in the gap shows worse hiring numbers for these ethnically diverse hires, these ethnically diverse associates. So as we talk about these exits, you'll see a column that says unknown, right? So let's just talk about that for a second. So this is all the exits, every single exit from the top 200. Now, we easily know if they return to another top 200 firm. We know if they return to a law firm that we cover over 5,500, or if they went into one of the 7,500 companies that we have in our in-house product. So when we see unknown, it's really unclear what they went at that time, but we keep researching, and as we find that out, then we'll be able to fill out this chart just a bit more. Here we see the returns to another top 200 firm went from 31% to 23%. Returns to law firms outside that group went up 20% to 22%. Moves into corporations went down by 6%. So looking at different groups, so we sort of now parsed, we divided all of those exits into different groups. Only white women are below the average return for 2023. However, the percentage of return for ethnically diverse hires is much lower than it was. They are returning at a much lower rate than in previous years. Women laterals are getting a bit closer to parity in 2023. The gap is much less than the years before, which may explain how they went to that 51% on the associate level. Women hiring on the entry level began outpacing men in 2020, and it has continued that way since. So here are all the laterals by JD year from 2023, and we've divided them by gender. So we're just trying to see the divide in lateral recruitment by age, and we're using that JD year to do that. So just looking from afar, you can see that there are many more women laterals on the younger side, that's the bottom chart, than the older side, that's the one on top. Remember, women are in purple and men are in the light blue. Looking at the older laterals, you see that men outpace women by a good margin. And in many groups, while in the younger set, recruitment is relatively even until we get to the year 2015. But after that, women never eclipse or pull even with men. Here we're looking at the time it takes to make partner in the top 200 on average, right? So these are days to partner. In 2012, there was just a 39% gap between entry-level hires and lateral hires in the time that it took to make partner. Now that gap kept increasing over time, and it hit the highest point in 2021 at 104%. That gap now rests at 99%. But you can easily see the number of days it takes to make partner on average has just increased every year until 2022. And there it dropped 4 points. And it dropped another point this past year. And it's really nice to see this tiny trend downward. In 2022, these firms hired a good deal more entry-level hires than laterals. That kind of explains that promotion chart we just saw. Over time, that pattern began to change, and in 2018, we saw laterals outpacing entry levels for the first time. Lateral hires topped entry-level hires year after year, but the gap was closing in 2021 and 2022, and in 2023, entry-level hires surpassed lateral hires for the first time in 6 years. Now, these schools achieved triple-digit hiring in the top 200 in 2022. This is the number for 2023. Georgetown led with 385 in 2022. That number dropped to 349 in this past year. But all of the numbers went down. Even though they hired more entry levels than laterals this year, overall hiring was just simply down. Here are the promotion to partner stats. Now, as you can see in 2012, they promoted many more entry levels to partners than laterals. You can follow this chart till that dynamic began to change. And in 2018, the pattern flipped. In 2022, Entry levels had a 46% fewer promotions than lateral hires. But this year, I'm afraid to say that gap increased to 49% less. The promotions for women went up 2% from 2022. That's a full 10% higher from where they were back in 2012. It's a slow climb, but it's a climb nonetheless. Partner promotions for ethnically diverse attorneys have remained rather stagnant. Those numbers have remained between 16 and 18% since 2018. The job market has been on a wild ride in the last few years. So let's see what happened this past year. So we know demand fuels openings, right? Fuels hiring, business. This was a great piece mid-year, which saw the demand for litigation, labor and employment, and bankruptcy rising, but it was not rising evenly, however. Demand for these services in the AmLaw 100 was up just 1.3%, but it increased for mid-sized firms by 4%. So this is a chart of all the jobs that were opened during the 2023 year by practice area. Now we cover 1,200 firms in the job program, and you can see that litigation was far and away the largest area of need. Corporate came in a distant second, and intellectual property followed in third place. Jobs were just not as high across the board in 2023, but litigation gained openings while almost all the other areas lost ground. Trust in estates was really the only exception, and it gained just by 5 job openings. In January through July, more jobs opened than were closed. No, sorry, more jobs closed than were opened. Then in August through November, that flipped, and there were more open than closed. Litigation dominated each month, and then it fell to a low for the year in December, where it had just 422 new job opens. New corporate openings hit a high in January of 2023 with just 160 job openings and fell to a low of just 63 in December. Now, here are the openings. We're looking at the top 50 firms and the remaining 148 firms. So my first question was, do the top 50 firms just have enough litigators and they just don't need any more? So I took a look at current levels, and the top 50 firms have 41% of all the litigators in the top 200. They are the largest firms in this group, and they have the lion's share of litigators already in place. Now, we saw the high number of corporate attorneys that this group lost, the top 50 lost in 2023 and in 2022. Here we see that they opened more corporate jobs than the other 148 firms, which might mean their losses might have been a little too much in 2022 and 2023. They're looking to replenish some of those. We do see good news on the horizon. Our job trend report predicts activity, and it predicts that activity will increase in February and March of this year. We took a look at our prediction scorecard, and 8 out of 12 months last year, our predictions saw exactly expected numbers. Only 4 months were lower than our expectations, and reality never exceeded our expectations. So this is a pretty good scorecard. Now let's take a look at office openings and closings. California was popular in the top 200 with 23 new office openings, followed by Florida with 14, Texas and Illinois with 6. Dallas was the most popular city with 5 new job openings. Note that Tennessee and Colorado saw 4 new office openings. So now we're looking at firms outside the top 200, and we see California, also the state where the most new offices were opened. That number went up from 66 in 2022 to 85 this year. Florida was number 2 with 74 new offices. That went way up from 36 new offices the prior year. New York saw 71 new office openings, and that's way up from just 31 office opens last year. New York City saw the most openings with 21. That number was 15 last year. Los Angeles was second with 15 new offices, and Seattle with 13. That number was just 5 last year. So comparing growth in specific cities, we see firms outside of the top 200 building a presence in New York City. Everyone is growing in Dallas, and it looks like they have similar interest in Miami, Nashville, and Costa Mesa. Seattle and Philadelphia are also interesting in that the top 200 opened one office there, but the group under the top 200 opened several. So now we're going to look at net gains and losses. The 2022 AmLaw 200 opened 130 new offices, closed 45. In 2023, that number dropped to 87 new offices, and they closed 43. New York lost 5 offices overall in the top 200. Florida had the biggest gains, gaining 11 new offices, and California just had a net gain of 9. There was a lot of activity in California for those firms outside the top 200, but they actually ended up losing offices in the state, which also occurred in 2022 as well. New York and Florida gained in big numbers. Last year, Florida was at plus 13, but New York did not have big gains for this group. Their movement into New York is sort of new for 2023. So we learned a lot from the data, but of course, there's still more to know. This is just a little recap. The majority of firms in the top 200, they actually lost points in our Leopard Law Firm Index. The decline was really pushed by layoffs and the absence of hiring. The top 200 continued to recruit outside their normal network and brought in attorneys from smaller firms at the same rate as from their own top 200 group. The top 200 recruited more entry-level hires than laterals for the first time in 6 years. The time to make partner decreased for the second year in a row. Yay. The hiring gap for ethnically diverse laterals and entry levels increased this year by 5% for laterals and 3% for entry-level hires. That means their hiring was down. The top 50 firms experienced larger hiring swings and losses than the other 148 firms. Managing partners and chairmen retired at a much larger rate than normally seen within that AmLaw top 200 group. Corporate job openings were at a much lower level than 2021, 2022. Layoffs occurred and salaries rose within the same year, showing the volatility of the market and importance of strategic hires. And litigation is still king. Now we're going to look sort of comparing the 2 years together. Last year we said strategy is king, and firms really need to find a competitive advantage by not following the herd, by blazing their own path. That's not what we saw. Firms overcorrected on the corporate attorney front due to lower demand coupled with fears of a recession. Fears of defection fueled the retirement of more aging managing partners than any other year. And in this case, that was one example of them acting a bit proactively after firms got into trouble. Salaries rose in a sluggish hiring market because Cravath started the trend and others followed. What we said last year was mid-sized firms are competitors to the top 200, and we see that this year too. They are making a dent in those business areas of litigation, bankruptcy, and labor and employment. We said last year that the partner track is nearing a broken model. That old bargain is not working for many of today's associates, and that still is true. But now we see a tiny trend of these numbers going down just a little bit. We can hope that that continues. We said last year, churn is costly. You really have to consider the cost of every hire. They did not do that. They laid off attorneys and then turned around and had to raise salaries to bring attorneys back. They did not consider the costs of churn and the costs of each hire. Last year, we said the AmLaw 200 continues to grow in lateral hiring, over entry level hiring. Where does that leave today's graduates? This was a real worrisome thing for us. Eventually, you're going to have a hole in your tier of attorneys that are missing all of those people that were never onboarded. Well, this year, thankfully, we saw that statistic change, and we see entry levels topping laterals for the first time in several years. And that is the story of 2023.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. All right, let's get some feedback from the group. Annie, you want to kick things off?
Sure. It was great data, and thank you for going through it. One of the reactions that I had was similar to yours, Laura, when you were talking about the improvement that was made by women. And I thought, that's great that there's improvement, but wow, it's taking us a long time to get there. And I had these flashbacks of being in law school. I remember in the year, I think it was either 2000 or 2001, when I was there, it was announced that women for the first time were more than 50% of the law student population. And I guess it's just a mere 20 some years later that we're now 50% of the associate population. Hopefully in my career will be 50% of the partner population. But my overall thoughts on the data were captured. I think one of the things I was thinking is just how much contradictions were in the data, and that aligned with my own experience. There's these, let's just talk about something, simple like hybrid schedules. There's still really two schools of thoughts on that. There are the firms that are wanting to come back 4 or 5 days a week, and those that are fine with people staying completely remote. The abolishment of the affirmative action plans at a time where we still have so much progress to make in our diversity and inclusion efforts, the contradictions between layoffs and associate raises happening at the same time. And as we're probably all experiencing, there's a real push for hiring at the same time where there's a real justified hesitancy. So that was my thoughts on the data as well as my own experience.
Trish, you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, I think it's look, history's cyclical, right? And it's a tale of not two, but many generations. So you have folks who, as Danny just said, want to come back to the office, who want to return to training associates the way they've been trained the last 50 years, who want to return to the before times, right? As my brother calls pre-COVID. Sounds very apocalyptic, but so there are a lot of folks who want to bring things back there. And then there's a whole other school, and they're not, and that the schools aren't sitting in one particular seat generationally, I think, although there tends to be, a critical mass of folks who are perhaps in, Gen X, who are in the, let's go back to the old normal, and folks in Gen Z who want to move forward. But it really is that push and pull of generations and how people are looking at things. Are you future forward and future facing, or are you looking for a return to the norm beforehand? And it was just so overdone during COVID that we said it was a catalyst and whatever else, but it really did accelerate trends that were already coming. These things were already coming to a head, and it forced it. And I think we're seeing some of that in those contradictions, Danny, that you were pointing out.
Awesome. And Deborah?
Yes, I think the data is very interesting, and I think it shows a story of a real collision that's taking place. I think on one side, Laura, you talked about cutting jobs and raising salaries, and we've also known that rates are increasing. We've seen lots of stories about that. So you have those things going on, but then you have clients who are so much smarter, who are so much better, who are building in-house departments and increasing their legal spend. So I think that unless the firms do the hard things, which are not raising salaries, which are not necessarily cutting jobs, but really look at how they practice law, use technology better, look at alternative ways of billing, and all those things are harder for a firm to do because they're new behaviors. I think there's going to be a collision that takes place. And I think also with every kind of challenge that's out there, there are always opportunities for people who are smart, right? And so the firms that are able to do things in a different way, looking at different paradigms, I think they will be in good shape. I think the firms also that invest in greater efficiencies, including AI and different forms of billing, and maybe those are mid-sized firms and not large firms, who knows? But I think there is an opportunity out there.
Yeah. I do think there's several mid-sized firms that have alternative forms of billing. They have a different way to do it. And I think that's how they got a lot of the business that left, the big companies. As they keep raising salaries, they keep raising the billing rate. But from surveys that we've done with women, and we're doing one right now with MLA on Gen Z, they would much rather have a lower salary and not have that big billing rate to have to deal with. So that's out there, and that sentiment is growing, and that's something that firms are going to have to really consider. Every time they raise salaries, those billing rates go up too, and those companies that hire them are becoming a little reticent to pay those higher prices year upon year. Yeah.
All right, good stuff. Danny, a little question for you. Just looking back over your firm, looks like you guys had some growth this year. Going into the year, when you set your goals, do you feel like you had a pivot at any point during the course of the year, or were you able to kind of project out what you guys were going to do and you kind of met those targets?
Well, we did meet our targets, never satisfied, of course, but Laura hit on it in her presentation today. We were told to be strategic, and we really tried to do that. We've been accused as other firms before in our recruiting efforts of being haphazard or reactive. And we rolled out a strategic plan that had a large recruiting component to it for 2023. And that plan really tried to address client needs, look at succession planning, build on existing strengths, areas that we did not have work in that we thought we could start anew, and really focused on that. And that focus made it easier for us to talk to headhunters. It made it easier for us to go out and talk with our clients and with potential laterals. And so the acquisition that we had was an acquisition of IP attorneys, a boutique, and that was one of the areas that we had identified as a priority. So that deliberate and intentional way of recruiting helped us to get to our goals.
Deborah and Trish. Deborah, I said it earlier, but I was looking at your post that you put on LinkedIn recently about when to start talking to associates about their BD strategy and plan. I thought it was a great post and a lot of good interaction. Want to kind of share your thoughts and insights around when we're onboarding these folks, when the best time to start getting them going?
Sure. I think that young or new partners really do want to know certain things, and new associates do too. We've concentrated on training the partners, but I think when associates join a firm, they want to know how the firm operates. They want greater transparency. So I think it behooves us to let them know how the firm operates. And by training them in business development and client care, I think we're doing a lot of that. And I think it makes great business sense, because we've all experienced the partner who is just named partner, newly minted, who says, I don't have any contacts, or I've been busy for the last 7, 8, or 9 years doing work. I don't know anyone, and I don't know how to develop business. So I think starting them early, you are much better off. And that way you end up with a population that's really working for you. But I think part of that means that you have to have a compensation system so that you are figuring out, are you going to reward these people or not? You have to have a good accountability system to know how they're going to track expenses and file expenses. So there needs to be a structure that really supports that. And it needs to be a serious endeavor, not just a one and done kind of program.
Awesome. And Trish,
I was saying, in addition to starting the training earlier, as Deborah said, I think it's a great thing to add into the mentor programs, just that discussion of business development concepts and war stories and different styles of business development. So there are multiple ways to start driving home the business development themes early in an attorney's career.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely, because I'm always very amenable to agreement, and I don't like conflict, especially on a panel. Just kidding. No, I agree with all these things. I mean, you need a curriculum, you need something that is staged by where people are in their careers, right? So it's relevant, so it's stage appropriate. To Deborah's point, a lot of it in the beginning should just be client care and client communications. You can often attach ethics credit to that because there is an element of that that relates to the rules of professional conduct, whatever. But also to Deborah's point, yes, you want to teach people about client development and business development, but by the same token, they do want to know how firms work. And I think this touches on the turnover we're now seeing in firm leadership, right? Because it's historically, even in the largest, most sophisticated firms, it's sort of been like, hey, this guy's great at bringing in business. Let's put him in charge of, and it's him a lot of times, right? Let's face that. Let's put him in charge of this practice group or this office or this firm as a whole. And as Heidi Gardner of Harvard points out, business school works one way where you're working in teams and you're understanding things. Law school is a whole different kettle of fish. So I think that we need more at the law school level. And then certainly when we onboard attorneys, we need to have consistent business education. We need people to understand profitability and all of the nuances that go into how we price work and the services we deliver to clients and all of that sort of thing, and very much have that service mindset, because I think that fuels creativity and how they might work their relationships with clients, which again, so you're not just raising rates, every year and not thinking about how you can revolutionize the relationship and really, embed it more deeply. So I think I went off on a tangent. I'll stop now, Phil.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think, from what I'm hearing, you guys are trying to do things strategically. The firms are trying to do things strategically to help the business grow and everyone to be set up for success. I'm curious to know, obviously, the input from the client, right? So the systems that you guys put in place to ensure that your clients are, getting the needs and support that they need. Deborah, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that from your perspective and working with
Sure.
firms.
What I'm seeing a lot of, and I know you were asking me earlier about what I see. I think I'm seeing that firms want better practice group functions. They want to know that, they've created these organizations with departments and practice groups, but they want to make sure that the practice groups are being led the right way, that there's an emphasis on the bottom line, that there are real strategies and real plans, and there are opportunities for growth. I think in the past, it used to be, as Trish said, it was, someone's a rainmaker. They're great at developing business. Let's make them the head of a department. Well, those are different skills. And so I think firms are paying closer attention to training people. And I think training people shows itself in so many different ways. I think the rise of the talent manager is something we should all look at within law firms. It's such an important role right now. And I think there's an acknowledgement by firms that some people are trained best in groups. Others are trained on the job by doing or being almost an apprentice. And some need a personal coach. And so you look at people now, I think more individually than you used to in law firms, and say, how am I going to grow this person? And you're taking a much more bespoke approach. The other thing I see with firms is that, I think we mentioned the MLA surveys, and those are excellent. And Laura had mentioned them. One of the findings of the MLA surveys has been that compensation is not the only reason someone's going to stay at a firm. And it's generally not the main reason people go. Very often they're unhappy with the culture. And I think as marketers or as firm leaders, we need to realize, this is becoming the ship of Theseus, right? Where all, you say basically if a panel is removed and replaced every year on a ship, eventually is it the same ship? So that's what's happening with our culture. The people are changing constantly. And what do you do to maintain that culture? So that's also a key question that we're getting asked.
Awesome. Trish or Danny, anything else you guys want to add to that, or?
No, I'd say that I think what Deborah is saying is correct, that people are adopting a more bespoke approach to training. There's definitely a more intentional type of, sort of cognizance of what different types of people need. whether it's personality driven, whether sometimes, we may take folks who are not comfortable in a larger setting, put them in a smaller group, all of that sort of thing, I think is really important. One thing I keep hearing from folks in my generation who are partners from all different law firms is, well, but, how are we going to train this COVID generation and whatever else? And look, change is difficult, right? But data can drive it much more easily, because then it's not I think, it's look at what this shows. People are leaving because they're unhappy about X, or, and the other thing is too, people just leave, right? They don't tell you I'm miserable, I can't stand coming in here most of the time. They just go. So you need to be proactively attuned to this stuff. You need to be looking at the data, surveying people, putting information together. It's interesting to me, we tout this apprentice model once people finish law school. It was fairly common, at least in certain states, up until the 1950s, that people didn't need to go to law school. They could just apprentice at a law firm and then take the bar. Okay. So yes, the 1950s were some time ago. But it wasn't that long ago. So these things change, we need to be more open and more flexible in how we look at these things and how we address them. And I think data is really the route to go with that.
Data is going to impact everything we do going forward to such a larger extent than it's ever done before. So, AI creeping its way into the way that we make recruiting decisions, the way that we're training, the way that we're leading, and the way that we're working with our clients. I found a unique way, or at least maybe a different way than what we've traditionally done of partnering with our clients, is to be that full service partner, that trusted advisor, and taking a holistic service approach with clients and assisting clients with things like analyzing data and putting dashboards together and embracing and sharing in technology initiatives, helping to train them in things and provide services to them that are even outside of maybe what we would look at as just the legal services.
There's a list that I have, and if anyone wants to contact me, I'm happy to send it to them. But there's a list of maybe 20 questions that I tell partners they should know about each one of their clients. And they need to know the client's organization. They need to know who that person is reporting to and who's on their staff and what metrics they're judged by, all of those things. But very often we see that clients and lawyers have a very transactional experience, and that's not what makes it sticky. You really have to dig in deep. I agree, Danny.
And I think it's interesting what we're hearing from clients. We do have client feedback, and I always love talking to clients. And a lot of times now they've got someone, a legal ops manager, director, who is, a point person for me to talk to and my team, for us to try to structure and put together more of the value add type of services and options. But we hear a lot that these in-house folks don't have professional development opportunities. Corporations don't offer the same sorts of training that we as law firms offer to our attorneys, or even speaking engagements, or, publishing opportunities. I mean, these aren't new. Obviously, this stuff has been out there forever, but there's a large hunger for that. So I think just being smart about what are we already doing that we can repurpose and that we can partner with clients on. Folks need to just think a little bit more creatively, just shake it up a little bit.
And I'm just looking at the wonderful comments. You have such a smart group of people on the call who are listening in. I think, someone pointed out that it's difficult to describe what's special or different about your firm. And I think that's very important. I think, and I completely agree, it is difficult. But asking the right questions, looking into the firm's history, looking into why clients do hire them, really figuring out what it is that makes them different is just so important. So although I love the idea of a mission statement, I think really figuring out how you're going to differentiate your firm is probably more important.
I think we used to define culture by, were you a sweatshop, or are you a firm that had a lot of work-life balance? Like, it's so much broader than that now. And it is difficult sometimes to differentiate yourself. And our Chief Diversity Inclusion Officer has talked about when we shouldn't be out there looking for culture fits, we should be looking for culture adds. And I like looking at like that, like how are we going to be adding and progressing and making our culture and training and investing in our employees? Do you promote within, or is there a lot of lateral hires? How do you treat your employees? Is it looked at as a high performing culture? Are people responsive to each other? So it's much broader than it was before, just on, how hard do you work? And it takes a lot to really think about who you are, what place you have, in the market, and try to, think about your culture from a very personal and organic way and not just numbers based.
I agree with that to some degree, but by the same token, I think because I've worked with lawyers since I was, whatever, much younger than I am now. I'm a little bit cynical. So I don't actually love mission statements, Deborah. I will disagree with you there. I'm too cynical to love them much or embrace them. But I do love the data. So, when a firm says we're committed to women in XYZ, how many women equity partners do you have? How many, those are the things that speak to me about where a firm's values are. Is sort of what tangible pieces can you point to? I then think if you want to communicate that to laterals, if you want to communicate it to clients, taking that sort of data, but also providing concrete examples, right? Because that's where the rubber meets the road. Like, can you point to, oh, we've never done layoffs in our 100-year history, or we, whatever it happens to be. Obviously, with the audience differing, the points that you cite will differ. So I agree. I think there's definitely that organic piece, but then, the numbers do matter to some degree.
Oh, absolutely. And I didn't say, I just to clarify, I didn't say I love mission statements, but I said more important than the mission statement is knowing what differentiates you.
I misquoted you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just wanted to clarify it. But I agree. I think looking at the data is so important. And firms that kind of make up their culture or make up their mission statement, people will figure things out. You're dealing with law school students that are going to look at the numbers. They want to know. They're going to look at Vault. They're going to look at Chambers. They'll look at Law 360 and AmLaw, and they will figure out what your situation is. So you need to be very honest in reflecting the truth.
All right, that's good stuff. I know we're coming up on 2:00. I figure we can probably take this a lot longer, but let's start doing the crystal ball look ahead for 2024. Deborah, you want to kick things off?
What we should look for, I think we're going to look for law firms to be more professionalized than they have been in the past. And you might say, well, they've been doing this for a long time. They've had marketing for a long time. They've had recruiting for a long time. I think firms are getting better and better and more sophisticated. I think they're hiring people with more experience because there are more people with more experience. I think their clients are demanding things. So I think that they are going to kind of up their game. And I see that happening with marketing programs. I see it happening with coaching. I see it happening with strategic planning. I don't think a firm can just kind of say, we're going to hire a lateral without understanding the market. They're going to call Laura. They're going to say, help me. I need to know how to make this work effectively. What are my chances? What's the data? So I think we're seeing things like firms getting their systems in order. And of course, I think firms are experimenting with AI, but I'm not quite sure if that technology will come more from the firms or the vendors or the clients pushing. So I think it's a really interesting time to look at that.
Danny?
Yes, everything that was said throughout this presentation is really going to build the foundation for looking forward. So I see a lot, I see more IT hires sometimes, I think, that are going to be happening at firms than attorney hires, because we're really going to have to embrace and stay on top of all of this innovation that's out there, teach ourselves how to use it, teach clients how to use it. AI, of course, being the biggest one. And I think we're really going to have to look at how we're going to compete for associates, because we just can't keep increasing salaries. The compression issues are just going to take over with what we're paying, council level, shareholder partners. So we talked a little bit about culture, but really looking how we're going to differentiate ourselves with associates to be the most attractive. And we have to just stop saying that, the new generation doesn't get it or doesn't work as hard. We have to take the time to understand what those differences mean and, address the way that we frame it, really try to understand and just, approach things from a more collaborative way.
Awesome. Trish?
Tying it up and running over, Phil. I think that everything everybody said, it's correct that we need to make sure that we're being more strategic and less transactional. So, it's one thing to sort of win and get the lateral, but what are you doing to keep the lateral? How are you making the lateral successful? How are you helping them to blend? And how are you helping the firm to blend? All of that. So that eyes on the prize and being longer sighted, I guess, and more strategic in how you approach all of these things. I agree with Danny about the tech stuff. It's enormous. AI is such a huge area for in-house counsel. And, it's a profession that's struggling to change. The rules of professional conduct have not kept pace with technology for the last 20 years. So they're certainly, now they're floundering completely because they haven't absorbed those. So I think that, we're going to see those firms that are quick on their feet and a little bit more open to change continue to perform better and be the firms that are attractive to those people, as Amanda Brady put in the chat, who are not just motivated by being at a firm with the highest profits per equity partner or whatever. What are the things that are going to satisfy people and keep them there? As Danny said, you need to understand that.
Agreed. Laura, any last words of wisdom?
Well, boy, there was so much good stuff that we talked about today. But I would say, we talked about the churn, right? How they really need to pay attention to the numbers. They also really need to understand where they are in line with their competitors. They can look at their return on investment of hires and say, oh, well, 80%, that's pretty good. But if your competitors are at 90 and 100, then you might know you have a problem retaining your talent, right? And that requires data. And I think they're getting better at looking at data and asking for data, and that should continue to grow this year. Benchmarking against, your firm, against your competing firms, against the market, all of that is really important. And that's a data point you can plug right into AI and it will tell you what to do, right? But the data has to be strong and accurate. And I think they're beginning to pay attention. I hope that will continue. I'm also really worried about diversity hiring. We have another diversity webinar that's going to be kicking off in a few months and looking at where we are now and what we think is going to happen. But it's something that I really hope people keep top of mind. Yes, you can change your language in your fellowships and in your, summer associate hiring and still continue, your quest to get more, equity inclusion in your firm. It's not illegal. So we're going to be really watching that this year and hoping for the best, but I'm prepared for the worst.
Well, great stuff, great insights. Thank you, Trish, Danny, Deborah, and Laura, and also the audience. I think this was probably the most interactive webinar we've done. So a lot of great comments and feedback from everyone attending. As mentioned, this was recorded. The slides and the recording will be shared along with a polished up white paper in the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone, and thank you guys for really taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was great.